Hey everyone, Anthony Fantano here, the internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for a review of the new James Blake album, The Color in Anything. Singer-songwriter, multi-instrumentalist, and producer, Mr. James Blake, back with his third commercial LP. It's 77 minutes long, comes 3 years after his sophomore effort, Overgrown. And it's been a low-key couple of years for James Blake since the release of that album. He had like that 200 Press EP, that Modern Soul teaser track, which actually lands on this record. He recently turned up on Beyonce's new album, not only singing, but with writing credits too, which was awesome. And now, with no warning, aside from a couple teaser tracks, we have this new record, just out of the blue, new album, bam! And I'm not really sure what to expect from it, you know? James Blake's last album I thought was decent. While there were some good tunes on it, it felt like he was kind of oversimplifying his sound, going a little less abstract, which I loved about his debut, in order to come together with tunes that were just a little more coherent and accessible. No doubt I would love to see James Blake get more adventurous, but what side of James Blake are we going to be hearing on this new album? Because there's so many faces to this one single artist. There's the art pop James Blake and the abstract dubstep and electronic music producer James Blake. There's the piano somber ballad man James Blake. There's the alternative R&B James Blake and the blue-eyed soul James Blake. And he's never quite reconciled all of these sides of his persona on one single release. However, with this album being as long as it is, I kind of get the impression that James will be exploring a lot of sides of his musical persona on this album, and possibly just letting his whims take him wherever he feels like going. While you do get a taste of every little thing from James Blake on the 17 tracks on this record, this album also kind of feels like I'm just simply peering into James's musical sketchbook. Nothing feels super finished or developed or even polished sometimes, which for diehard fans could be really exciting, hearing James in such a raw and intimate way. But in my opinion, the kind of basic synth patches and the very dry percussion on a lot of these cuts don't exactly hold a candle to the really imaginative soundcraft that got me into James's music in the first place on his debut. And a lot of the songs at the core of these tracks aren't really well developed either, though that's nothing altogether new for James. Usually his songwriting style is pretty abstract, doesn't exactly loop together into a series of very catchy and snappy verses and choruses, even when he is trying to write something pretty sharp and to the point. However, with this release, his tracks don't feel so much abstract or like they're trying to subvert this regular verse-chorus-verse formula, as much as they just feel like bridges to nowhere sometimes. Or he's delivering tracks that just kind of redundantly cycle through the same musical ideas, beat loops, or like little vocal lines like on the song Put That Away and Talk to Me, which is not only one of his most obnoxious productions yet, but also just a really I don't know, just a whiny song. The track tries to put it in an abstract way, but this song to me smells like I'm listening to James essentially being frustrated that he's trying to connect intimately or communicate with somebody, but they're not really there, and I'm presuming that it's because their face is in like an electronic device or something. And James doesn't exactly make a case for putting the phone away, maybe this song is in fact influenced by something else, and I'm totally wrong. But still, the demand that James tries to put onto this person he has in mind on this track just seems really, I don't know, bossy and like he's, come on, put it away. There's the track I Hope My Life, which easily has one of the worst synth leads to ever make it into a James Blake song. So bad that not only does it just have this really sour impression on my ears, but I cannot get it out of my head. I dislike it so much. And then there are moments on this album where James certainly experiments with eyebrow-raising tracks like Two Men Down, which to me, at the beginning of the track, which is completely different from the second half, the track starts off with these odd fractured pieces of instrumentation, these moody guitars and kind of kooky percussion, and James's vocals being just lost in a sea of reverb like he's singing from the bottom of a well or something. And then suddenly the track transitions into these elevator-friendly beats and keyboards and these high-pitched lead vocals. It kind of sounds like James accidentally made sped up vaporwave. And while it's definitely strange and experimental, it doesn't really feel otherworldly or like I'm being transported to another place like I have been on James's previous albums. Instead, I feel like I'm listening to a ballad with just some needless DAW fiddling on top or just laced into the instrumental. There are a few admirable fusions here of James's very soulful and passionate and kind of somber songwriting or piano balladry matched with some admirable electronic tinkering, like on Radio Silence, or on Love Me in Whatever Way, or on Choose Me, which has kind of a gospel vibe to it, and it's one of the few tracks here where the instrumental gets so much more dense and intense as it goes along, and the various sounds that are added into the beat actually empower one another to create one of James's most complex and amazing productions yet. I also like the track My Willing Heart, which, despite the fact that it sounds like a live take piano ballad with a bunch of electronic sounds added afterwards, the track does come together well, and it does make for, I guess, a kind of intimate feel to this song. So there are most certainly highlights on this record, moments where James pulls through with a good track. However, the song Points has the pleasure of being the worst song James Blake has ever written, recorded, and released to the public for commercial sale. The track starts off well enough as James kind of delivers this mantra of sad you're no longer here or sad you're no longer her. The way that he says that last word, it's kind of ambiguous and purposefully so. It's like this person is no longer around, but also maybe because they're no longer themselves. But then James's vocals, they start kind of cycling because they've been sampled, and the beat of the song sort of starts to come to fruition. And then comes some of the most unfulfilling loops and sound effects that I've ever heard in one of his beats. The grooves on this track have this kind of annoying cycle to them, like I'm listening to a record skip. Then all of these really farty bass notes start popping in, and then just one completely thankless and annoying like sound effect after another just popping uselessly into the beat, only making the song more unlistenable with each new sound. The song I Need a Forest Fire is a duet with Bon Iver, none other than Mr. Justin Vernon. And it actually goes off without a hitch. It has kind of a sudden ending on here, which again is one of the many moments where this album feels just kind of like rough ideas thrown together into an LP for the fans to kind of consume. It's like a bunch of B-sides and spare ideas. Again, that musical sketchbook. And even though this track does feel a tad unfinished, it does feel like a legitimately great piece of kind of futuristic synthetic soul. And I think his vocals on this track, they're really energetic, especially at the beginning of the cover. He's like, woo! And the song Noise Above Our Heads is similarly soulful, hypnotic, and alluring as well. Most definitely another highlight. And modern soul also makes the ending of this project relatively strong. And the closing track, while I do think it is a good tune, and James Blake once again comes through with a good vocal melody, he's always good at popping in with a quality vocal melody, even if he does kind of cover it up with some lackluster or just needlessly cluttered production. But on this track, it's the exact opposite. We don't get any beats, we don't get any instrumental here. It's just purely James's voice. But he manipulates it with all these chorus effects, so you're kind of hearing these lower harmonies, these higher harmonies, working together very closely with his voice from the beginning to the end of the track. And while, again, I do love the melodies of the track, and I do think some of the harmonies that he works into the song are very creative, I do think the kind of chorus effect gimmick of the song does get a little old after a while. I'm really not sure what to say about this record. It's a real mixed bag. It is all over the place. It is not cohesive at all. There are certainly bright spots on here. Some of my favorite James Blake tracks turn up on this record, but I think some of his worst tracks turn up on this thing too. And I sort of understand why James and company would promote this album as kind of like a surprise record, because how do you promote a record like this? Not only is it so long, but there's not really anything here in terms of a big single, and you don't just want to come out and tell everybody, hey guys, it's just kind of like a random collection of B-sides and extra tracks and stuff like that, because the material here, in terms of the quality of the songwriting, in terms of the quality of the production, does not sound nearly as mulled over as Overgrown, or especially his debut. I'm not saying James cheated everybody on this record or anything like that, but he clearly just wanted people to interpret these songs at sort of face value and just kind of take them for what they were, and not sort of put any kind of, I guess, expectations or assumptions in the mind of the listener when they went into trying this record. Because it's not like the production is so bad that this album is lo-fi or anything like that. But this is definitely James Blake in the raw. This is not a groomed James Blake album. Not only because some of the tracks do feel a little underdeveloped, but the flow of all of these tracks coming together, they don't really complement each other all that much. You know, again, James just kind of jumps all over the place and indulges in pretty much every sound and side of his musical style, which I enjoy and appreciate from the standpoint of a music fan that's just kind of interested in James Blake as an artist, because I'm curious as to what his songwriting and his creative process is. It's sort of interesting in a way to hear him come through with these tracks that, to me, I think they kind of fall on their face, but it sounds like James creating a track where he just has no inhibitions whatsoever. But in that same breath, this is not really an album I enjoy, at least not all the way through, and not an album I see myself coming back to anytime soon, with the exception of just maybe a couple tracks here. I'm feeling a light to decent 5 on this thing. Tran. Zishin! Have you given this album a listen? Did you love it? Did you hate it? What would you rate it? You're the best. You're the best. What should I review next? Hit that like if you like. Please subscribe or you'll die. James Blake, eat some cake. No, I'm sorry. That was bad. James Blake, The Color in Anything, forever.